It was a Sunday like no other. The sun hung low in the sky, casting an eerie golden glow over the small town of Hawthorne Hollow. The sound of church bells rang through the air, their chimes heavy and ominous, echoing far beyond the village's borders. The air smelled faintly of flowers from the nearby gardens, but underneath that, there was a strange, lingering sense of something wrong. For most of the town, it was a time of celebration. Easter Sunday was supposed to be a day of rebirth, of joy and of family, but not for everyone. For those who remembered, there was something else, something buried deep in the history of Hawthorne Hollow, something that only the oldest of the townsfolk dared to speak of, and only in whispers. At the edge of the town stood St. Michael's Church, an old structure shrouded in thick ivy and moss. Its stone walls were weathered by time, and its windows, cracked and murky, seemed to watch over the town like eyes filled with secrets. The church had been abandoned for years, its doors shut tight, but it still stood, looming as if waiting for something or someone. Elliot Crawford, a man in his early 30s, had just moved to Hawthorne Hollow. He wasn't religious, but something about the town called to him. He had rented a small house on the outskirts, nestled between the forest and fields. He'd heard the rumors about St. Michael's, how the church was said to be cursed, abandoned after an incident many years ago that no one would talk about. The town spoke of it in hushed tones, like a dark mark on its otherwise peaceful history. That Easter Sunday, Elliot found himself walking toward the church, drawn by an inexplicable force. It was said that every Easter, the church would come alive again, its doors creaking open just a crack, as if inviting someone to come inside. People had claimed to see strange lights flickering through its stained glass windows at night, even though no one dared enter. Elliot's footsteps crunched on the gravel path as he approached the church's weathered gates. A chill ran down his spine as the wind picked up, swirling the dead leaves around him. He hesitated for a moment, but curiosity gnawed at him, pushing him forward. He pushed open the rusted gates, which groaned in protest, and stepped onto the grounds of the church. The graveyard stretched out behind it, rows of ancient tombstones partially covered in moss. Some of the gravestones were so old that the names were unreadable, weathered away by time. But it was the church that held his attention. He felt like it was calling him, an unspoken pull that he couldn't resist. The massive oak doors of St. Michael's Church were cracked open just slightly, as if waiting for him. He felt a strange shiver run through his body, but he stepped inside, his breath caught in his throat. The air was thick with dust and the scent of mildew. Faint rays of sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows, casting eerie, distorted colors across the worn pews. The church felt alive in a way it shouldn't have. It felt hungry. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind him with a deafening bang, plunging him into darkness. His heart skipped a beat, and panic surged through his veins. He fumbled for his phone, the screen flickering to life in his hand, but it showed no signal. The oppressive silence of the church suffocated him, broken only by the sound of his own breath. Then a voice, soft, faint, whispered from the shadows, chilling him to the bone. "Elliot." He froze. No one else was supposed to be here. The voice came again, clearer this time. "Elliot, welcome back." A cold, unseen hand seemed to grip his chest, tightening with every breath. He whipped around, eyes wide, but saw nothing. Suddenly, the sound of chanting filled the room. Low, guttural, and unintelligible, the voices seemed to rise from the very walls, echoing in his ears. Elliot's pulse raced as he stumbled backward, his feet knocking over a pew. The candle sconces lining the walls flickered, their flames sputtering in the oppressive air. And then, in the center of the church, something began to form. A figure, tall and dark, its form shifting and rippling, as if it was made of smoke and shadow. Elliot's breath caught in his throat as the figure moved toward him, its face hidden in darkness. He took a step back, but the figure continued to advance. His heart pounded in his chest, and a primal fear surged through him. His legs trembled, but he couldn't move. It was as if something held him in place. The figure spoke, its voice deep and hollow, reverberating through the church like the sound of 1,000 voices. "You were meant to come. It's time, Elliot. Time to fulfill the pact." With those words, the floor beneath him seemed to tremble, and the figure's hand reached out, brushing against his arm. The cold that seeped into his skin was unlike anything he had ever felt, as if it was pulling his very soul out of his body. And then, as quickly as it had appeared, the figure vanished into thin air, leaving Elliot standing in the cold, dark church, his heart racing, his thoughts swirling. The chanting stopped. The silence returned. But it wasn't the same silence. It was heavy, suffocating. He was not alone. The darkness was alive. Voices, they grew louder, more frantic. They were calling to him. Come closer, Elliot. Come closer. You can't escape what's been set in motion. Against every instinct that screamed at him to run, Elliot gripped the door handle once again. It turned easily in his grasp, as if it had been waiting for him. The door creaked open, and he stepped into the darkness beyond. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a hidden chamber far deeper within the church. The air inside was cold and stagnant, as though it had not been disturbed in centuries. A faint, acrid odor lingered, mixing with the musty scent of the church. Elliot stepped inside, his senses heightened, his heart still pounding in his chest. The room was vast and circular, with high, arching ceilings that seemed to disappear into an abyss of darkness. The stone walls were lined with old candles, their flames flickering weakly. The air hummed with a low, ominous frequency, a constant vibration that seemed to penetrate his very bones. In the center of the room, a large, circular altar stood, covered in ancient runes and symbols. Elliot's eyes widened in horror as he recognized the markings. They weren't just religious symbols. They were something else. Something far darker and more primal. The runes appeared to be etched into the very stone of the altar, glowing faintly with an otherworldly light. He could feel their power, their ancient evil, pulsing through the room. As Elliot stepped further inside, he heard the chanting again, this time louder and more distinct, as if it was coming from all around him. The voices were not human, not entirely. They had a guttural, inhuman quality, echoing and reverberating through the walls. The sound was overwhelming, and it filled the chamber, closing in on him from all directions. Then, as if on cue, the candles along the walls flared up, their flames burning bright and unnaturally steady. The symbols on the altar glowed more intensely, casting eerie shadows across the stone floor. It was as though the room was alive, waiting for something, or someone. Elliot. The voice came again, clear and unmistakable. It wasn't a whisper this time. It was a command, a summoning. He turned toward the altar, his eyes locked onto the object that sat upon it. It was a book, old and battered, its pages yellowed and curling with age. The book was thick, bound in what appeared to be human skin, and its cover was adorned with strange symbols that matched those on the altar. The book seemed to hum with a dark energy, as if it were alive. Without thinking, Elliot moved toward the altar, drawn by an unseen force. His hand trembled as he reached out to touch the book, and the moment his fingers brushed against its surface, a shock of electricity surged through him. His body jerked backward, and he stumbled, his vision swimming. The room spun around him, the chanting intensifying, reverberating through his skull. His head throbbed as if it were about to split open. His breath became shallow, his lungs struggling to draw in air. He tried to pull away, but something beyond his control, held him in place. Then a voice, no longer from the shadows, but from inside his own mind, spoke. You are part of the sacrifice. The words were not spoken aloud. They were inside his thoughts, creeping through his consciousness like a poison. His heart raced. What did it mean? What sacrifice? The altar symbols began to shift, glowing brighter. The walls trembled as though something was stirring beneath them, a presence ancient and powerful, clawing its way to the surface. Elliot's breath caught his throat as the room seemed to stretch and warp, the shadows twisting into grotesque shapes. Suddenly, the ground beneath him cracked open. The stone floor split apart, and a deep, guttural growl echoed from the abyss below. The chamber seemed to collapse inward, the walls folding in on themselves as if the very church were alive and hungry. Elliot stumbled backward, his legs weak and unsteady. His eyes locked onto the crack in the floor, and he saw it. Something crawling up from the depths. A shadow, moving with unnatural speed and fluidity. It was like a mass of black smoke, but within it he saw eyes, glowing red eyes, burning with an unholy hunger. And then, from the darkness, something reached out. A hand, long and twisted, its fingers clawed and sharp. The air turned cold again, the temperature dropping to unbearable levels. He gasped for air, his chest constricting. The thing from the depths was coming for him, its fingers inches from his skin, ready to drag him into the void below. But just as a hand reached him, there was a deafening roar. The earth trembled violently, and the entire church seemed to groan under the weight of something vast and terrible. The hand hesitated, then recoiled, retreating into the crack as quickly as it had appeared. The rumbling continued, and the walls of the church shook. Elliot stood frozen, his body trembling as the church seemed to come alive in the most unnatural way. It was as if the very foundation of the building was waking, roused by an ancient force, one that had been dormant for centuries. Then, with a final, terrifying jolt, the room fell silent. The shaking stopped, and the walls ceased their groaning. Everything was still. The candle flames flickered one last time before extinguishing entirely, leaving Elliot in absolute darkness. His mind raced, trying to comprehend what had just happened. The creature, was it real? Was it the thing that had been calling to him? Had he just been moments away from being consumed by whatever lurked beneath? Suddenly, a sound, soft at first, like a whisper, cut through the silence. Elliot strained to hear it, his ears straining, his body still paralyzed with fear. "You can't leave." The words were clear now, spoken not by the shadows or the entity from below, but by someone or something standing just beyond the edge of his sight. The presence was back, and this time it wasn't going to let him go. Elliot's blood ran cold as he slowly turned around. The air was thick with tension, every inch of the church now filled with an oppressive, suffocating force. He could feel eyes watching him, lurking in the corners of the room, waiting. And then, just when he thought he was alone, he saw it. A figure, tall, cloaked in shadows, its face hidden beneath a hood, stepped into view. The figure's movements were slow and deliberate, its presence suffocating. Its breath, if it had one, was barely perceptible. "You thought you could escape," the figure intoned, its voice echoing through the chamber. "You thought you could leave, but you are bound. This place is your fate." Elliot's heart skipped a beat. What did it mean? The figure raised a hand, and with it, the very air seemed to shift, bending around him as if the room were alive. And then, darkness. Elliot's pulse hammered in his ears, his body frozen in terror as the figure in front of him slowly raised its hands. The atmosphere in the room thickened, becoming stifling, the air around him pressing down like a weight. His mind scrambled for answers, for escape, but everything felt like a trap. Every path leading back to the same inevitable fate. The figures had fell back, revealing a face that made his blood run cold. It was a man, but not one that Elliot recognized. His features were gaunt, skin stretched tight over his bones, eyes dark and hollow like the pits of hell itself. His mouth was cracked into a twisted grin, the kind that was born from centuries of torment. "You don't understand, do you?" The figure's voice was chilling, like ice scraping against stone. "This place, this church, it has always been part of you. You were the final piece, the one we've been waiting for." Elliot's chest tightened. "What do you mean? Who are you?" The figure stepped forward, its movements unnaturally smooth, like it was gliding across the floor. It reached out, and Elliot instinctively took a step back, but the room seemed to shrink with every move he made, the walls pressing in like they were closing around him. "I am the keeper of the rituals," the figure continued, his smile widening. "I am the one who ensures the pact is fulfilled. And you, Elliot Crawford, are the final offering." "Offering? What are you talking about?" Elliot's voice shook, his breath ragged as he backed into the stone wall, realizing there was no escape. The figure's eyes flashed, and suddenly the temperature plummeted, his breath coming out in visible clouds. "You were born for this. You were chosen the moment you stepped foot in this town." Elliot's mind reeled. His body was frozen, but his thoughts raced. Was this some kind of sick joke? How could he be chosen for something like this? "To fulfill the curse," the figure whispered, as though revealing some long-hidden truth. "To keep the balance, to keep the evil contained. But now that you are here," the figure's hand shot out like a viper, grabbing Elliot's wrist with inhuman strength. Elliot gasped, trying to pull away, but his strength was no match for the figure's grip. "You are bound to it now," the figure growled, his breath hot and fetid on Elliot's face. And there is no going back. Elliot's vision blurred as the darkness around him seemed to swirl and pulse. The air hummed, the very fabric of the church seemingly shifting, warping with every passing second. And just as he felt the ground beneath him crumble, a scream erupted from